I'd just like to introduce Humans in the Loop now, which is going to be a community keynote from Eva Gumnischka.
Good.
Yeah?
Thank you.
Okay. The floor's yours. Yeah?
Thank you. Hi, guys. I'm very happy to be here. I'm very happy to see the focus that this conference has on ethics, on community, on AI for social good. And I would be really happy to share with you and to raise awareness a little bit about the pipeline that is currently being used for generating data for machine learning, what its problems are, and what solutions are out there in order to provide ethical data preparation and data labeling for all of these amazing machine learning applications that we're developing. Because especially if we are trying to talk about AI for social good, if we're using exploitative practices or kind of sketchy practices to obtain the data and to label it, it does not really fit into the whole narrative that all of us are trying to develop and stick to right now, which is ethical machine learning and how to ensure that. So we're talking here about specifically supervised machine learning, computer vision in many cases, that requires a lot of very intensive data preparation and data work. So for example, this is one research by Crowdflower that asked people who are working on data science in different companies what they spent most of their time on, and more than half of the time is spent just on preparing, labeling, cleaning the data, and so on. And then, of course, a lot of companies are trying to get rid of that type of labor or to just reduce the amount of time it takes. The way that a lot of companies obtain their data is usually by having some kind of internal sources. Some people label it internally. Some platforms for user-generated content have access to readily available data submitted willingly by their users. We have seen some cases of just, putting up some app that helps people see how they will look when they're older, and thousands of people submit willingly their own photos. So there are definitely ways to get data easily, but sometimes it can be very time-consuming, and a lot of companies are trying to either outsource it, get some kind of free data, open source data sets, trying to find ways in which they can get not only the data, but also its labels in a very easy way. One of the most important platforms and actors in this space is Amazon's Mechanical Turk. Can everyone raise hands who has heard of Mechanical Turk? Okay, cool. Has anyone used it as a client? Okay, cool. It might be interesting to also see what the experience is of people who have used it. But basically, we have this idea of crowdsourcing that has recently been behind a lot of very interesting developments in machine learning, just because it gives researchers and companies access to this global workforce that is readily available to label data and to complete quick tasks. So here we're talking really about very easy micro tasks that people complete in exchange for example, here we have 1 cent, 2 cents, 20 cents. So for companies, it's really cost-effective to use it. However, on the worker side, when you see, okay, 20 cents is maybe all right, but then I waste maybe 5 minutes, or even if it's 1 minute, to earn 1 cent. How many tasks do I have to complete until I earn at least minimum wage, A lot of the people who are on Amazon's Mechanical Turk are from the US. There is 15%, I think, from India. But especially compared to US salaries, the money that you can earn on Mechanical Turk is really not much. So this is why a lot of people have been talking about the rise of the 1 cent workforce. There are more than 500,000 people who are signed up on Mechanical Turk, also some other click worker platforms. And for people coming from countries like the US or for example, for Europe, the money that they are able to earn on these platforms is really not much. Let's say that with different price levels and different minimum wages across the world, maybe in some places it's more cost-effective to be on these platforms. But really, considering the enormous amount of work that these people do, it's really a question of, okay, how closes this to labor exploitation. Also because people on those websites are gig workers. So they're not hired, they're not even considered freelancers, they don't have a contract. They do have a contract, they sign the terms and conditions of the platform, but they do not have any other types of labor protections. So for example, Mechanical Turk was behind the biggest revolution, right now it's referred to, by generating all of the labels for ImageNet. So the researcher Fei-Fei Ling, she's a professor at Stanford. She was conceiving this enormous data set based on the hierarchy of WordNet that would encompass tons and tons of different classes and subclasses so that she would be able to power the computer vision advancements. However, she was estimating that, okay, if we try to hire Stanford undergrads to do all of the dirty work, how sometimes it's usually done at different universities. She estimated that she would need around 90 years in order to label all of that data. So she was kind of getting desperate, and then someone told her about Mechanical Turk. And by using Mechanical Turk, they were actually able to access 50,000 people who collaborated and submitted their work by labeling different images. And this is how they were able to label more than 14 million images. So what is an alternative? Recently, there have been a lot of different organizations and businesses finding an interesting business niche in this that right now is called data labeling or microwork. They have been creating this industry called impact sourcing. So this is basically outsourcing with a social mission. They pitch themselves as kind of an alternative to Mechanical Turk. So the idea is that even though this is a low-paid labor, it can still be channeled to vulnerable populations that need this kind of job and that wouldn't otherwise have access to other job opportunities. And their rights can be somehow guaranteed through the work of these organizations. They will be able to maybe sign contracts, become freelancers, receive training, and this amount of money would really make an impact on their lives. So one of the pioneers is DDD. This is Digital Divide Data. They actually started as a transcription company that was transcribing archives of different newspapers from the US. And they quickly switched to OCR, and right now they're heading some of the very interesting projects for OCR, including some manual transcriptions, but they're also developing a lot of technology themselves. A lot of other outsourcing businesses that were focusing more on data entry are right now all focusing and shifting to machine learning just because it's so exciting. There is a lot of demand. There is a lot of work to be done there. Samasource is a great organization that is doing a lot of important work in different countries in Africa. There are some companies that are employing people with disabilities. So for example, Autonomy works with people with Asperger's and autism because they're trying to take advantage of their ability to focus very intensely on data, so they're using them to help with QA and also data labeling. And in addition, there are some companies that have recently, like ours, been trying to channel work towards refugees and people who are in unstable labor conditions. So basically, this is what we do. We try to provide ethical data labeling, kind of an alternative to Mechanical Turk. So we try to say, okay, we are going to provide dignified salaries to our workers, but we're still going to keep trying to provide some very easy services and tasks that are very accessible. So we do not require any type of, let's say, previous experience or education or even knowledge of English or the local host languages of the countries where we are. So this is how we have conceived of this idea of, okay, why don't refugees become trainers or teachers of AI? They can be the human teachers that teach artificial intelligence how to think. And this can be a preparation for them to access the local labor market. We can equip them with work skills, with soft skills, and to teach them computer skills. And they can also receive access to the coveted position of a remote freelancer who is independent, can work wherever they are. So it's really something that is very convenient to people and allows them to have freedom, especially for women refugees and for housewives. This is our network. We collaborate with a lot of different organizations around the Balkans and the Middle East, and we provide their trainees with different jobs related to data labeling for machine learning, while they also invest a lot in training them in computer skills and different technical skills. Our services, as I mentioned, are really easy to complete. So they include data collection or categorization or labeling of the images. But they can also be very complicated. So for example, this is an aerial image. It was taken in Dubai, I believe. And what we do for such images is provide full semantic segmentation of them. So labeling every building, every tree, every road that there is. And such an image can take maybe 6, 7 hours to complete. In exchange, it's very well paid. So this is how, by focusing on labor-intensive tasks that are a little bit more complicated, you wouldn't like to put this up on Mechanical Turk because the quality that you would receive would be very bad. We train people to kind of specialize in this type of labeling. So this has a lot of applications, for example, for facial recognition or self-driving cars and drones and satellites, for retail, for pose detection, for video. These are just some of the industries and use cases that we work for. These are some of our clients. And we're kind of platform agnostic, so there are a lot of different tools that we're using for the labeling of data. So if also any of you guys is working on developing machine learning algorithm that needs a lot of data labeling, I would be happy to tell you a little bit more about all of these tools. Some of them are open source and free, some of them are platforms, but they're really nice to use. So for example, we have just a couple of examples. This is just like very simple bounding box labeling that can be done for object detection. Here we can just label all of the houses or all of the cars and so on. This, for example, is another open source tool called VIA. It supports a lot of different shapes, so you can use circles and ellipses and polylines, polygons, whatever you want. And this really, by labeling a lot of images, you can help and if, of course, they're very precise and they're good for your use case, you can definitely obtain a lot of good results. Then we have, for the more advanced semantic segmentation, you can use it like this. So for example, this is a platform called Supervisely, and this is the manual work process for tracing all of the objects that there are. So for example, the river, all of the trees, the road, and so on. And this is kind of using polygons, but basically you're labeling every pixel and what class it pertains to. Another option that we're currently exploring is how to automate the process a little bit. So we're using superpixels in order to just color the big areas in the image and to be able to do the work maybe 5 times as fast. This doesn't work well on every image, but for some images it's great because you're just clicking and coloring the superpixels and you get really precise results. So this is kind of what I would like to transmit, that both crowdsourcing and having dedicated teams have their benefits. For example, for crowdsourcing, you really get access to a global workforce of people. So if you're trying to get, for example, for natural language processing, a variety of utterances and how people might express this or that sentiment or this or that intent, it might be very useful. There is a quick delivery, and also for workers, there is an availability of tasks. However, with the dedicated teams, if you want to ensure a consistent interpretation of the data, so for example, I want to label satellite or aerial images like this, but I want to make sure that every house is labeled in a certain way and that every tree is labeled separately, but maybe if I put this up on a crowdsourcing site, it's not going to be the same. Every person is going to just interpret the data in a different way. So a dedicated team is very appropriate for that because they can work on a long term for your project, they can develop the expertise. And of course, for the user, it's better because they get higher payment. So that one project, for example, if you have 10,000 images, instead of distributing them into 10 images per user, we can distribute them into 1,000 images per user, and they can actually earn a good salary from them. And yeah, this is our impact. We're currently working with a lot of refugees in the Balkans, in the Middle East. We're really trying to invest in their skills. We have a specialized freelance program for women, and I would love to share a little bit about our social impact to anyone who is interested. Thank you.